Grace looked at me and said, "In the meantime, I did a lot of other things. How much has the history of this world changed because of you? Have you ever thought about how your name will remain in history? It seems to be genuinely admirable." Hearing that, he suddenly wondered. In the future, how will people remember me? It's not too late. You can go higher, you could have everything in the world if you wanted to. I remembered her offer she had made the other day. I would have refused. People's minds are bound to change. With time, everything changes. Isn't there something in the world that doesn't change? At my words, she smiled. Yes. Gold never fades no matter how many years pass. Is money only forever? The Rothschilds are a financial family that people around the world know. The honor and status he possessed is second to that of the royal family, and his wealth is not even comparable to that of him. It is an old lie that humans are equal. Destiny is different from birth depending on nationality, wealth, status, gender, race, etc. Britain is a constitutional monarchy, and the kings and nobles still retain their positions. Judges wear white wigs to give their trial, and at Westminster Palace the Senate, open only to the nobility, is held. The upper class has upper class life. They enjoy their own culture, gather and party. Some spend their whole lives trying to get into it. But the higher you go, the sharper the ranks become. If I had accepted her offer, I would have gained the wealth and honor of the Rothschilds, and the strength to carry on with them forever. What would the world look like from up there? When you get on top of that, what's next? But I have chosen to remain here. Because I already have everything I want. Autonomous electric vehicle, battery, TWR, game, Semangium, Inter-Korean economic cooperation, etc. You have obtained many keys to the future. I really think it's great. But the most dangerous moment is when you think everything is going well. What is dangerous? You know, don't you? I don't know. At my words, she smiled bitterly. Then she put down the teacup. She said, "The financial crisis will happen soon." It was like saying it would rain tomorrow. What do you mean? Financial crisis means financial crisis. What else could you have? Her words were not much different from those of the collapsers on TV. But the weight of her words was completely different. She still spoke in a calm voice. This crisis will be different than before. It must be something that mankind has never experienced before. If the previous years were the Great Depression and the Great Recession, this time it could be called the Great Collapse. Everything will fall apart. It would be better for OTK company to prepare. It's not funny enough to be a joke. I can't believe it's true. But what was happening now made it impossible to hear her. If this was solid information, I wouldn't easily tell anyone. Why are you telling me that? She smiled brightly. Even if you don't tell me, you'll figure it out anyway. At that moment, something flashed before her eyes. When I woke up, I saw that she was smiling. I think I saw it too. It was as if he was saying he knew what I saw. I asked her, looking at her. "How did you know that?" Grace Rothschild smiled brightly. "Because we will make it happen." After meeting Grace Rothschild, I had a question. A lot has happened in the world over the past 250 years. In the 18th century, the steam engine was invented, the Industrial Revolution began, and America gained independence from Britain. A revolution broke out in France, and Napoleon's army swept across Europe. The 19th and 20th centuries that followed were a series of turbulent changes in the world order. The colonial rule of the great powers, the expansion of trade, the two world wars, several economic crises, the Bretton Woods system, the Nixon shock, the birth of the EU, Brexit, etc. There have been countless incidents and accidents. Countless companies went bankrupt, countless banks went bankrupt, and countless royalty and nobles collapsed. Meyer Amschel Rothschild could see the future like me, and with that power he made Rothschild a financial elite. But even after his death, the Rothschilds continued to grow for over 200 years. How was this possible? I think I now know why. Have you created the future? She didn't deny me. The easiest way to predict the future is to create it. What will happen someday. What matters is when. Predictions without timing are meaningless. But what if the timing could be artificially manipulated? When the glass is full, add the last drop. Did you periodically create crises like that and make huge profits in the process? It's not uncommon for certain targets to attack in the hope that they will perish. No, it is rather common in the financial world. There are countless hedge funds that have done similar things. However, most of them target companies and those larger than that target countries. George Soros, who attacked the British foreign exchange market, is a representative example, and Korea also collapsed like that. But is Rothschild going to do it all over the world? I felt something boiling inside me. Guns aren't the only way to kill people. Sheep are gentle animals, but as the saying goes in England, they eat people, so is money. Money destroys lives and drives people to death. Why are you doing that? It's something everyone needs. In the meantime, the world has enjoyed a very long boom. Someone has to pull the punch ball when the party is in full swing. This is a famous quote from former Fed Chairman William Martin. Are the Rothschilds going to do that? She nodded her head slightly. It's about returning the abnormal to the normal. If you borrow money, isn't it natural to pay it back? It is difficult to even estimate how much money has been released around the world due to low interest rates and quantitative easing since the financial crisis. If you recover that money at once, it will be a huge shock. It's not that bad. Take Korea as an example. If Korea had not succeeded in industrial restructuring after the financial crisis, would it have been able to grow as it is now? Until then, large Korean companies were doing easy business by importing key parts, materials and machinery from Japan, processing them and then reselling them. However, as the exchange rate rose more than 3 times and it became difficult to depend on imported products any longer, it was forced to localize it. Companies risked their lives to develop technology, which gave Korea a chance to stand tall as a technological powerhouse. Strong industrial restructuring took place, marginal firms collapsed, and the surviving large firms grew larger. Thanks to the high exchange rate, exports greatly increased, and large corporations competed fiercely in the global market to further develop their technological prowess. With the opening of the financial market, accounting in line with international standards has been established, and financial statements have become more transparent, resulting in an increase in foreign capital investment. Although the polarization between large corporations and SMEs, and between regular and non-regular workers, has worsened, growth has continued, and now it has risen to the ranks of advanced countries. It is undeniable that the IMF caused great damage, but there were also many positive aspects. Korea has raised interest rates to 27% and implemented strong restructuring to prevent capital outflows. We privatized lax public corporations, cut staff by 20%, cut salaries and various welfare benefits, and opened up and advanced the financial market. If it were not for the IMF, would the Korean government have been able to carry out such reforms on its own? No one likes restructuring and austerity. As you can see from the current situation in Greece, politicians have no choice but to be conscious of their votes. It is impossible for any government to carry out such a strong restructuring. However, it was the IMF, not the Korean government, that was responsible for restructuring and austerity during the Asian financial crisis. This allowed presidents and politicians to hide behind the IMF and avoid arrows of condemnation. The people, out of anger at foreign capital acting like an occupation force, took out the gold from their chests and paid off their national debt. He went on to say, if the dot-com bubble did not exist, would the internet giants exist today? Would the current technology development be possible without the global financial crisis? Capitalism has gone through several major crises so far. However, like the paradox of wildfires, such a crisis became the foundation for the next growth. So, is the crisis that will arise in the future natural? It is natural for the economy to find a balance point through a crisis. Even if someone realizes that this is a crisis and makes an investment, it is difficult to criticize it. However, didn't you guys raise the bubble? If this was really necessary, we should have responded before the crisis escalated. But now that the crisis has reached its climax, this can only be explained by the intention of this situation from the beginning. Grace Rothschild did not deny me. She said with a confident expression, "What is going to happen is bound to happen. No one can stop it. Even if it's you." I met James and Henry at the Golden Gate headquarters on Wall Street. Seeing people in suits moving around frantically, I realized that this is the center of global finance. Henry also came here to check on the situation after the US interest rate hike. There is no better place to gather financial information than Wall Street. Unlike what Gunn sees at home in a perfect suit, he has his sharp eyes again. James seems to be very old and tired without seeing him. Again, Warren Boat, corrected by age 90, is strange. Hearing my story, James said, spinning the wand in his hand. The Rothschilds must have been plotting something like that. It seems that he still hasn't given up on his old habits. Said Henry. There are a lot of people who want to create a crisis in the world. James put on his glasses and smiled bitterly. The real rich are born after a famine. It's just a question of whether that's possible. It is said that even if a farmer dies of starvation, he will embrace the seeds and die. When famine comes, everyone suffers, but the degree of damage varies from person to person. Someone will be able to buy the paddy field at a bargain price and wait for the next bountiful year to come. The middle class falls and the rich get richer. This applies both between companies and between countries. Financial capital goes in and swallows everything when companies and countries on the verge of bankruptcy collapse. This is not as easy as it sounds. Markets are like living things, and no matter how artificially manipulated, unpredictable situations can occur. After the U.S. interest rate hike, the market was flooded with all kinds of bad news. South American countries are falling like dominoes, and Southern European countries are also in crisis. Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal are all looking at the EU. However, there are few measures the EU can use. Since the interest rate is already at zero and quantitative easing has been implemented several times, it is difficult to release money anymore. The only remaining method is debt relief and financial support, but in the end, it is nothing but the money of the countries that have been working hard and saved so far to support the countries that have been in debt. Will the Germans and French people stand still? James shook his head. Just because those countries collapse, a tsunami called a financial crisis will not strike. It is true that it is a crisis, but it is not yet in a situation to discuss the collapse of the global economy. The bigger the capital, the harder it is to invest. If the Rothschilds are to profit from this crisis, there must be a market size to invest. After all, their goal is, said Henry. It will be China. The global financial crisis that began with the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers plunged the world into recession. The country that emerged as a relief pitcher at this time was China. China achieves an economic growth rate of close to 10% every year, and has grown to become the world's largest in both economic and trade scale, and is the world's manufacturing factory and consumer market. What if China collapses? Will the whole world be able to bear the shock? James said as he hawked the pumpkin on the head of his wand. China's crisis theory has been around for a long time. I nodded. I think it's been more than 20 years. When the economic growth rate was high, they said they would fail because of the demand for democratization, and when the economic growth rate fell, they said they would fail because of lack of jobs. It is similar to what is being said now. Falling into the trap of a middle-income country, the population aging has begun, the environment is polluted, the polarization is serious, the regional gap is concerned, there is a bubble in the real estate, manipulating statistics, it will split into several countries, etc. Can't we just give 100 reasons that China's economy will collapse if we leave a single collapser? Soros, he actually put it into action. George Soros, king of hedge funds. About 3 years ago he started short-selling the yuan, believing that the Chinese economy would collapse. He had a history of overthrowing the Bank of England and causing the Asian financial crisis, showing strong confidence even at this time. The hard landing of the Chinese economy is inevitable. It is normal for Asian countries' currencies to fall by 40% from now. Judging from economic indicators, the debt of Chinese companies was severe even at that time. From an external point of view, if you let it collapse, the yuan will depreciate due to a decline in growth rate and capital outflow. Conversely, if the Chinese government wants to inject public funds to prevent insolvency, it must lower interest rates and print money. Again, this is a factor that depreciates the yuan. James continued, speaking as if recalling. With George Soros at the fore, Wall Street hedge funds rallied. Kyle Bass, Stanley Druckenmiller, Jacques Schreiber, David Einhorn, David Tepper, and more. Famous investors on Wall Street who you might know by name sold all their big assets, including stocks, bonds, commodities, and real estate, and rushed in with live ammunition. And he poured those live bullets into the Chinese foreign exchange market. China even stepped up to the prime minister and directly criticized it. Short-selling speculators are trying to make a profit by inducing panic. The Chinese economy is not weak enough to be destroyed by speculators. What was the result? George Soros lost. Chinese banks and corporations did not collapse and the yuan remained intact. Hedge funds that had been selling short had to step down before the losses were even bigger, and George Soros also suffered huge losses and lost his hands. Why did this result come out? Hedge fund CEOs, including George Soros, have an incomparable level of knowledge and sense. Were they wrong? George Soros's thoughts and claims that the Chinese economy is at risk, based on various indicators, were common sense. It's just that China is a country where common sense doesn't work. China is the most unusual country in the world. As well as a population of 1.5 billion, they are choosing socialism politically and capitalism economically. Even this is capitalism, but in reality it is a state-led, planned economy disguised as capitalism. Most of GDP comes from state-owned enterprises. It is the state-owned bank that lends money to this state-owned enterprise. Therefore, unlike in other countries, even if a company goes bankrupt, the bank can wait long enough without collecting the money immediately. Also, as President Xi Jinping said, the Chinese economy is a huge sea. You can overturn a pond, but it is difficult to overturn the sea. Henry, who had been in deep thought for a while, opened his mouth. Even if the Rothschilds' fortunes had grown steadily over the past 250 years, their influence would have continued to diminish. That's why emerging countries have grown. Sharp point of view. Since the 20th century, the world's wealth has multiplied tenfold. And more than half of them occurred in emerging countries. No matter how large the Rothschilds may have had on the political and financial circles of the United States and Europe, their influence in emerging markets will be limited. Henry continued. Unlike the past, the modern financial system is becoming increasingly complex. Keeping it under control is not easy. If you play with fire incorrectly, the fire may spread, and there is no law that says that a famine does not lead to a great famine. I remembered Grant Darrell Rothschild, whom I met at the mansion in Buckinghamshire. If Rothschild could do whatever he set out to do, wouldn't he need to reach out to me? Is the cause of the financial crisis to extend their influence to China so that they can maintain their position? I remembered the case of Korea. Korea, which received bailout from the International Monetary Fund (IMF), due to the financial crisis, was forced to fully open its financial markets. Foreign capital was allowed to enter and exit freely in the stock, bond and foreign exchange markets, and restrictions on foreign capital shares of financial capital were abolished. As a result, almost all commercial banks fell into the hands of foreign capital. Lone Star's acquisition of Korea Exchange Bank is a prime example. Meanwhile, while Chinese capital has swallowed up companies around the world, foreign investment in Chinese companies has been severely restricted. Also, as in all countries, investment regulations in the financial sector are stronger, said James. If the Chinese economy collapses, the US will also be hit hard. But as long as they can swallow the Chinese financial market, the Rothschilds don't care who gets hurt. Whether it's long or short, the more everyone moves in one direction, the greater the initial investors' profit. Therefore, IBS, PFs, hedge funds, etc. claim that their investments are in the right direction, and they want all investors to follow in their footsteps. George Soros failed. This is because many investors believed and hoped that China would not collapse. Grace showed strong confidence that she would never fail, but behind that lies a sense of urgency that she should never fail. Can the Rothschilds succeed? James replied. The situation is very different now than it was 3 years ago. China's economic growth has slowed further, the asset bubble has deepened and debt has grown even more. And unlike Soros, they have the power to raise interest rates. As Warren Buffett said, you can't build something that nobody else has. Fed Chairman Maclay raised the benchmark rate, not because he was directed by Rothschild, but because he believed it was the right thing to do. I didn't say they had Ronald's weaknesses. But both of them would have noticed that the president is in a situation where he can't get his hands on the key rate hike. When interest rates rise, the value of money rises. When the dollar strengthens, the yuan weakens. China could raise interest rates accordingly, but in the current situation, there is a high risk that an interest rate hike will accelerate the economic recession. We just need to give the signal that the Chinese economy is going to collapse. As long as we can give a clear signal, the world capital will do what the Rothschilds will do without ordering. Money is the most powerful weapon that can move everyone. Once there is certainty, big banks and hedge funds will join the attack in unison. You might think that it's a Chinese thing anyway, so it's okay to cross the river and be disrespectful, but in reality it's not. Strictly speaking, it is not a fire across the river but a fire in a large house right next to it. Of course, the fire will spread in all directions. It is not just a Chinese problem. The moment China passes over, ASEAN and Central Asian countries will pass one after another. I nodded heavily. It may include Korea. The country that has been the biggest beneficiary of China's growth so far is Korea. Even now, China is Korea's largest trading partner, accounting for a third of its exports. There are a lot of sayings on the internet that they wish China would collapse, but if China does collapse, Korea is the country that will suffer the most. Korea is Korea, but there are other countries that are really dangerous. Which country are you from? Isn't there a country that depends on China for all its trade? There was a country that immediately came to my mind without thinking for a long time. I frowned and muttered. North Korea. The collapse of the Chinese economy is fatal for North Korea, which is just starting to develop its economy. If the crisis intensifies, North Korea will lock the door it had been struggling to open again and cry out for self-reliance. If another provocation is made to stabilize the system, the geopolitical crisis could escalate. This too will return another damage to the Korean economy. But this is a really serious case. If we work together to prevent the crisis from escalating before that, the outcome can be different. I said, muttering. There will be a financial crisis. You have to prepare accordingly. Henry's expression hardened at my words. Are you sure? Yes. Not because he believed Grace, but because he had seen his foresight. The global financial crisis that occurred in 2008 was the biggest crisis that occurred since the emergence of capitalism. However, mankind overcame that crisis and the world enjoyed a boom again. So what about the next crisis? What happens after everything falls apart? After finishing my schedule in the US, I returned to Korea with Henry. I wanted to meet Ronald, but it won't help much if I go to the White House right now. For many watching eyes, so it would be better not to contact each other for a while. When Taekyu heard my story, his eyes widened. Are you going to have a financial crisis? Aren't you crazy? That's it. Isn't it enough to eat for 250 years? It looks like they want to eat 250 more in the future. Read more at wuxiax.com. There is no end to man's desires. In particular, the more they have, the less likely they are to let go of what they have in their hands. I remember meeting Grace. What she cares about most is her family, and she will do anything for her. If you see foreknowledge, does this have to happen? Perhaps so. What will happen is about to happen. Aren't you supposed to tell your sister? Henry must have already told you. He must be taking countermeasures at the headquarters level. Taekyu said in a strange way. Did shearing really exist? First, it lends capital to emerging countries to support economic growth. After that, he raises interest rates, collects loans, goes bankrupt, and then sweeps away badly priced assets. Then it restores the economy, waits for the asset value to rise, and repeats the same thing. It refers to the predatory behavior of speculative capital, such as when sheep are well fed and then sheared periodically. If this were true, it wouldn't be as simple as it sounds, but would unfold in a much more complex and subtle way. Because the sheep will not stand still while shearing. Which sheep would want to be deprived of its hard-grown fur? Then what should we do? First, you have to prepare for the shock. OTK Company's main focus is automobiles and batteries. In terms of households, automobiles are the second largest asset after houses, and in terms of countries, they are the most traded item. When the financial crisis comes, people will be reluctant to buy a new car. The transition to electric vehicles will be delayed, and battery sales will also decrease. If the crisis gets bigger, it is highly likely that the investment you are making now gets caught. The factories we are building now, the Semangium development, the Inter-Korean economic cooperation, everything will be a problem. A gloomy outlook and pessimism poured in. The aftermath of the rate hike continued. Emerging countries raised interest rates one after another, raising concerns about a recession and the collapse of the asset bubble. The market reacted sensitively to even the smallest bad news, and even those who had little interest in the economy could feel the serious mood. Although the real economy has not yet been hit directly, the financial market has rapidly subsided. The stock price, which was expected to rebound as low-priced purchases came in, sank again, and the buying trend disappeared and real estate transactions froze. Companies with year-end settlement ahead were terrified that the exchange rate would rise further. Even though Christmas was approaching, it didn't feel like Christmas at all. The faces of the people who were smiling were full of unknown anxiety. Before the sun goes down. Again, bad news hit the financial markets. A bank in Inner Mongolia, China went bankrupt. According to the Deposit Insurance Ordinance, principal and interest are protected up to 500,000 renminbi per person, but those who deposited more and creditors lost their money. As a small local bank went bankrupt, the amount of damage itself was not that great, but it caused a huge aftermath. Bankruptcy in China is unusual. This is because in the meantime, whenever a crisis occurred at individual banks, the central bank, the People's Bank, forcibly took over and prevented depositors from losing. But this time they left it bankrupt without taking any action. This meant that the government was no longer stepping in to bail out bad banks. Anxiety spread, and astonished depositors all rushed to the bank to withdraw their deposits, and the banks were engulfed in fear of a bank run. The Financial Times published an article stating that 5 additional local banks, including Liaoning and Shandong, went bankrupt and about 20 were at risk. The Shanghai Composite Index, which had risen slowly as the theory of the Chinese economic crisis grew, began to plummet ahead of the end of the year. It fell 6.5% in one day, followed by a further 4.63% the next day. When the situation took a turn for the worse, the Chinese government took action. First, to prevent financial insolvency, they decided to check the banks and increase the guarantee amount for the deposits of ordinary people. In addition, various stock market stimulus measures were introduced, such as banning the sale of shares by major shareholders and encouraging companies to purchase treasury stocks. A spokesperson for the Commerce Department said in a strong tone, "The Chinese economy has no problems. Foreign exchange reserves are sufficient, and the government is always ready to take further measures to ensure financial stability. Those who spread rumors will be severely punished." 300 journalists who wrote articles pointing out the dangers of the Chinese economy were questioned by the authorities. Even without official instructions, portals and social media companies deleted or blinded their posts. Unprecedentedly strong media control and public opinion control were enforced, and the People's Daily and CCTV published articles defending the government's position. However, despite this precipitation, the stock market decline did not stop, and many people lost their fortunes. Instead of raising the benchmark interest rate, the People's Bank of China lowered the yuan's announced exchange rate by 6.3%. China has a uniquely managed floating exchange rate system. Therefore, transactions must be made within 2% of the exchange rate announced by the People's Bank of China. Asian countries' currencies actually move like a peg. As China devalued the yuan, the Thai baht, the Philippine peso, the Vietnamese dong, and the Indonesian rupiah also fell one after another. Bank runs and stock market crashes were also problems, but the most serious problem was real estate. In the meantime, the price of real estate in China has skyrocketed to the extent that it is said that it is money just by buying it. Concerns have been raised that real estate prices may plunge if financial instability spreads to the real estate. First-tier cities such as Beijing and Shanghai had the highest PIR, housing price to household income ratio, indices in the world, and local governments all started developing new cities. When a city is built on a wasteland land and apartments are sold, the construction industry is revitalized, increasing employment and increasing tax revenue. Therefore, the development of a new city was nothing more than a goose that lays golden eggs to the local government. However, the number of people who can purchase real estate is limited, but the number of vacant houses has increased as pre-sales are pouring in, and corporate and household debt has also increased significantly. Anyway, there is no problem when real estate prices go up. But the moment it falls, all problems arise. When the price falls, fewer people want to buy a house, and when demand decreases, the price falls further. If a situation arises where it is impossible to repay the loan even if the house is sold due to falling house prices, banks may go bankrupt one after another. The anxiety that started with the bankruptcy of local banks spread to the real economy after the stock market and real estate. Professor Nouriel Roubini published an editorial in the New York Times saying, "The gray rhino is heading head-on toward China." A number of bad news happened at the same time, and the internet was flooded with fears that China would soon collapse. The situation in China is serious now. Why is the Shanghai Composite Index like that? Is my Chinese fundy? Real estate is also in the process. That's how I've been building the house. Now inland cities are overflowing with empty houses. There are even ghost towns that are completely uninhabited. Isn't this a real financial crisis? How long will this guy's stock fall? The bankruptcy of China has begun. Get out of here quickly. Isn't Korea dangerous too? Stocks are no joke and the exchange rate fluctuates. Aren't Korea lucky to have Kong Jin-ho? What are you talking about? If there is a problem with the Korean economy, Jin-ho Kong will be the first to leave. Where are you going for the speculator class? OTK company is also said to be increasing its holdings of dollars. What's going on with Simangium? Will the construction go ahead as planned? The situation in Russia is also serious. Isn't that the point of inter-Korean economic cooperation? I wonder what Jin-ho Kong is thinking. As the Chinese economy faltered, the crisis in Europe became more and more serious. As hard Brexit becomes a reality, tensions have risen on the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. Britain has suggested that it can control the border, and the Irish Republican Army (IRA) has said, for the unity of Ireland, an armed struggle is necessary. I will not avoid it, he warned of terrorism. Germany and France have rejected financial aid from southern Europe. Greece has refused to implement further austerity measures, and calls have been made to leave the EU in Italy, Portugal, and Spain. Another primer was Turkey. A foreign exchange crisis occurred in Turkey, which was already suffering from a trade deficit due to capital outflows. As the government gave up its currency defense, the lira plunged as much as 25% in one day to a new low. Inflation is also serious, and there has been talk of whether redenomination should be carried out again. President Hakan Fidan said Turkey's economy is suffering because of the refugees, and has asked the EU for additional aid. In the meantime, Turkey has been receiving aid from the EU to accommodate the influx of refugees to Europe. They were still arguing with each other over the amount of the subsidy, but Turkey unilaterally issued a huge bill. The EU refused to do so and demanded that the details of the aid provided be disclosed, and President Erenler threatened to send refugees to Europe. In fact, it opened the way for some refugees to the EU because the refugee camps were saturated. As refugees flooded across the Turkish border, the already in crisis in the Balkans was turned upside down. Greece, Bulgaria, and Romania have criticized Turkey and said they will also allow refugees to pass through. Refugees prefer to settle in Western European countries with good economic conditions rather than Eastern and Southern European countries, which have difficult circumstances. This led to riots, this time in Germany and France. Even though they belonged to the same community, their circumstances were different and they had different ideas, which was a fundamental problem with the EU. The interests of each country were sharply opposed on issues such as Brexit, the Southern European financial crisis, and refugees, but no solution was found. Moaning from various crises in the EU and China. World economy perfect storm threat. Is the financial crisis starting? It's hard to feel safe even in Korea. The US should stop raising interest rates. If isolationism intensifies, it will have a big impact on the Korean economy. Even after the new year, depressing articles continued to pour in from the beginning of the year. In the meantime, there were many concerns that whenever bad news broke out, it could spread into a financial crisis. The positive theory that it will pass this time, and the negative theory that it is really dangerous this time were opposed. Time will tell which one is right. We decided to have dinner at Hyunju's sister's house for the new year. Unlike at work, my sister greeted us in comfortable clothes. Henry went to the Chinese branch to find out the exact situation, so he was the only one at home. We sat around the table, ate and drank alcohol and drinks. Hyunju Nuna said with a tired expression on her face. Even though it's a new year, it doesn't feel like a new year. Ellie shook her head as if she didn't want to think about it. It was the worst December ever, she said. I don't know how Christmas and the end of the year passed. The financial markets fluctuated day after day. Ellie worked overtime every day and she barely had a day off for Christmas. She was tired that day too, so she slept at home. Until just 2 months ago, the global economy was growing at a moderate pace. When this atmosphere was turned upside down in an instant, everyone responded that they did not know what was going on. Experts all raised their voices saying that this year is dangerous, and companies did not even properly plan for 1 year. Read more at wuxiax.com. At the end of the year, governments around the world tried their best to defend the exchange rate, but the Chinese stock market crash, capital outflows and hints of further rate hikes by the Fed made the dollar stronger, and the financial statements of banks and companies were messed up. Compared to other countries, the one is holding up well. Hyunju's older sister smiled bitterly. It's a funny situation. The United States, which had driven the global economy into recession due to the subprime mortgage crisis, has recovered, but now other countries are collapsing. The U.S. economy is booming thanks to the California Recovery Project, the commercialization of self-driving electric vehicles, and the growth of internet companies, but many countries have to worry about recession and deflation. Ellie asked. What is America thinking? After they burst into a crisis, they release money all over the world to overcome it, and now they collect it without even caring about the situation in other countries. When the foreign exchange crisis broke out, Korea implemented strong austerity measures such as raising interest rates, privatizing public enterprises, selling assets and cutting staff in the public sector, following the instructions of the IMF. So, what was the U.S. response to the financial crisis? Surprisingly, it was the opposite. They released money by lowering interest rates, financed private companies to make them public, bought assets and increased jobs in the public sector. The astronomical amount of money released by low interest rates and quantitative easing spread all over the world, causing an asset bubble. But when they suddenly decided to recover the money they had sowed, there was another uproar. It was the United States that caused the global financial crisis, it was the United States that sowed the dollar, and it was the United States that reaped it. From the point of view of emerging countries, they stand still and are engulfed in shock every time. Like it or not, this is the international reality. It was triggered by the rate hike in the US, but it would explode someday if left alone. Ellie nodded her head. Even though everyone knew it was a crisis, she let go of her hand. I should have prepared for it earlier. The theory of the global economic crisis did not come out a day or two ago. Everyone is well aware that debt reduction, industrial reform and restructuring are necessary. However, no one was properly prepared and they got drunk on money and had a lot of fun. Even countries that have already experienced a crisis have no intention of tightening or repaying their debts. Even though the national finances are in debt, politicians are only thinking about the next election, and they have overused populist policies. Looking at what other countries are doing these days, it seems strange that Korea took out even a gold ring from a closet and paid off its debts diligently. Would things have been different if there had been more time? There are many people who take advantage of crises to profit. Maybe I am one of them. Then, are the people who created the crisis and those who knew it was a crisis and did nothing to blame for it? I muttered, remembering the words of Grace Rothschild. What will happen will happen. Financial instability spreads and begins to affect the real economy. Now everyone could feel it. Just like during the financial crisis, car sales were put to a halt. The automobile industry is large and employs a large number of people. Even if the car is not sold, the factory must be returned, salaries of tens of thousands of workers must be paid, and customers must be maintained with parts makers. In the case of Karis, The order volume had already been delayed for more than 6 months, so it was not enough to impede production right away, but it was difficult to execute a large-scale investment plan such as the construction of a new factory. GM, Ford, Toyota, Daimler AG, and the Volkswagen Group have begun reducing plant uptime due to reduced orders. When the flow of money was tight, everyone took an emergency. Not surprisingly, almost every automaker was jumping into the transition to self-driving electric vehicles. Sales of existing vehicles are decreasing and investment is increasing, but the new industry is not yet making a profit. Although the real crisis had not yet begun, screams erupted from all sides. I spoke to President Trusova Rosatom. TWR orders are decreasing. Exhibitors are also reluctant to make additional investments. If the demand for electricity decreases due to the economic downturn, there is no need to build nuclear power plants. In fact, Britain and the Czech Republic have begun reviewing nuclear power plant construction plans. If this happens, Russia's plan to find a breakthrough in Western sanctions with the construction of the TWR as a weapon will inevitably be disrupted. Vermorpt game development conducted by OTK Games was also in crisis. There are more than 30 companies that are primarily related to them, and it is questionable whether they will follow suit. From the moment the data center was built, it appeared to be drifting. In the meantime, we have been increasing our investments, expecting future returns. There is a lot of money to put in here and there, but if there is a crisis, the recovery time will be delayed even more and it will be difficult to raise money. Taijayu shook his head. The timing is the worst. I said with a frown. I must have chosen this timing on purpose. It's the worst for others, but for the Rothschilds, it's the best time to maximize their profits. Ting asked me. But as Rothschild said, wouldn't it be impossible to develop Simangium and North Korea to claim $70 billion from Japan? I thought for a moment and then shook my head. It's not out of tune. But it has been delayed since the financial crisis. No crisis lasts forever. Someday it will be overcome. However, in the meantime, some people fall and some people only make more money. When the dot-com bubble burst, many internet companies collapsed and many talented people lost their jobs. However, the insolvent companies that corroded the market disappeared, the industry's credibility increased, and the government's support was concentrated on healthy companies. The surviving companies recruited layoffs from insolvent companies and developed the technology to dominate the unrivaled market. This became the background to the birth of giant internet companies such as Google, AMZ, and FaceNote. The situation was still the same. Although many startups did not make any profits, their prices soared only with anticipation, and the global asset bubble became serious. As Warren Buffett said, now is the time to buy good companies at a high price rather than buying good companies cheaply. So, is this crisis also necessary for the new era? I got the call and headed to Simangium with Taekyu. The reclaimed land where only sand and dust flew has now been turned into a huge construction site. Heavy equipment was in constant motion and construction was in full swing in all directions. In the place where the groundwork was finished, roads were already being laid and buildings were going up. If the construction proceeds according to plan, a completely new city will be born in the next 5 years. There we met Nam Pung-hyen, director of the Simangium Development Agency. Until before, there was a buzz about investing from all sides, but from a certain moment contact was cut off like a lie. Even existing appointments are being cancelled one after another. People gather where people gather. Whether it is a satellite city connected to an existing metropolis, the development of a new city capable of self-sufficiency requires a strong driving force. However, when the financial crisis comes, large-scale investment plans are disrupted and momentum is lost. He continued speaking with a dark expression. Investors are concerned that the development of Simangium will be delayed. A lot of companies are slowing down their investment. Even large corporations declared emergency management and started to improve management efficiency and reduce costs. So, you have to be careful with your investments. Disneyland's Universal Studios theme park construction also showed signs of delay. As anchor investors hesitated, other investors also delayed the start of construction and additional investments. Usually, urban development builds infrastructure with money from the sale of land and apartments. If funds don't circulate properly, everything comes to a standstill. Foreign investors also keep asking questions. They seem to want to hear the representative's point of view. S90 development is a project led by OTK company. No one can tell me directly because they are looking at me, but the rosy prospect that it will become a high-tech city that will lead Korea soon entered. I thought of Dubai. Dubai, which had developed a new city to the extent that it was called the miracle of the desert, went bankrupt due to the global financial crisis that just broke out, and many development plans were suspended or cancelled due to the failure to pay money. After that, he managed to survive thanks to the support of Abu Dhabi, the leader of the UAE, but he is still experiencing difficulties. Fortunately, Dubai faced a financial crisis after the midterm construction period, but S90 is only in its infancy. So easy to get your feet out. I will contact major investors directly. Please proceed as planned for now. Okay. Governments around the world have made efforts to establish financial stability measures. However, there was no answer unless the US stepped in, as it was triggered by the US key rate hike. The world only wanted the US to stop raising interest rates. But just before the start of the new year, Fed Chairman Maclay announced another 0.5% increase. I am raising the federal funds rate, currently operating at 2.5% to 2.75%. From 3% to 3.25%. The global asset bubble is severe due to low interest rates. We need to take a preemptive response before there is a bigger risk in the future. As he said, the money released through low interest rates and quantitative easing flowed into the asset markets such as stocks and real estate, not into the real economy such as investment and employment, creating a bubble. Liquidity is abundant even in a situation where the real economy is stagnant and income does not increase, and real estate prices in major cities have already exceeded the level that the middle class can afford. Ultimately, the only way to solve this problem is to raise interest rates and recover the money loosed in the market. The problem is that it's too fast. In terms of percentage, interest rates have risen more than 70% in just 2 months. Even within the United States, concerns about a recession are starting to emerge. President Ronald spoke in front of reporters while the U.S. Congress was debating the issue. It is the Fed's decision to raise rates. Chairman Maclay is a very good person and I believe he is making good judgment. This was, in effect, a statement that the U.S. administration did not intend to put the brakes on interest rate hikes. As the news spread, the stock, foreign exchange and bond markets fluctuated again. With the U.S. continuing its dominance in raising the benchmark interest rate, the world's attention was drawn to China. Compared to 10 years ago, China today has a completely different status. China accounts for about 15% of the world's GDP. If this economy collapses, an unimaginable shock will strike the world. And Korea cannot be free from its influence. As concerns grew, the Kospi index broke the 3,000 mark, which had barely broken through. Foreigners sold stocks and bonds, exchanged money for dollars and exited the Korean market, and the exchange rate soared. It has risen over 10%. This may not seem like much, but in other words, all assets in the country have fallen by 10%. 10% of the entire nation's wealth was lost without knowing it. In the old days, thieves crossed walls and entered other people's houses and stole money and precious metals. But these days thieves are just manipulating numbers. Changing just a few numbers changes homeowners from individuals to banks. Businesses go bankrupt, stores close and people lose their jobs. Houses, shops and buildings are still there. This must be the fear of finance. I kept checking the financial markets. Fortunately, there has been no movement of specific forces so far. After the aftermath of the U.S. key interest rate hike passed, the stock market stopped its decline for a while to see if the government's stimulus measures were working, and the exchange rate rises stagnated. But this is just the calm before the storm. The real thing hasn't even started yet. Industrial capital has factories and offices, hires people, and everyone knows what to make and sell. On the other hand, it is difficult to grasp a clear reality of financial capital. It's everywhere like a ghost but nowhere. They freely cross borders in pursuit of profits only. Even if you understand the flow of money, it is difficult to determine who is the owner. The money doesn't even have a name tag on it. Take you asked. Read more at wuxiax.com. If the financial crisis breaks out, can't we take a part as we did during Brexit? I sighed and shook my head. It's not easy. Why didn't you think of it as me? I've been making money using the future that only I know of. But they know the future just like me. Know as much as I know when, where, and how it will happen. It would be nice to have more information than I do. In addition, they have more movable capital than me, have better management capabilities, and have a system to invest in them. Most of the good investment opportunities have already been seized by the Rothschilds. The money I can earn by jumping in here is a new piece of blood compared to them. More than anything else, I don't have much money to spend right now. There are so many things that I have been working on in the meantime, and money is constantly coming in. As an investment company, OTK Company has acquired several companies so far. However, unlike other investment companies, he did not exit and grew the company through continuous investment. Even if my fortune is over $1 trillion, it's just an arbitrary estimate of my value, and I can actually move less than $100 billion in cash. On the other hand, it is not even predictable how much cash they have, how much they can move. As an example, Redstone Group's assets under management are $400 billion, and Albert Management is also known to have more than $100 billion. As much as they decided to cause a crisis, they must have turned their assets into cash before that, so in reality there will be more. You can hedge it to some extent, but the losses are much higher. Electric vehicles, batteries, TWR, Vermorg, Simangium, etc. All subsidiaries are already taking a hit. Hearing what I said, Taekyu narrowed his eyes. Then shouldn't it be stopped? How do you stop it? Well, isn't there some way? So what is the method? I'll have to look for it from now on. In the first place, Grace proudly told me her plan was probably because she was certain that she would never be able to stop it. So, what is the best choice I can make in this situation? After thinking for a while, I smiled. Now I think I know. Taekyu looked at me and asked. What? Why? Grace Rothschild told me there was going to be a financial crisis. What is the reason? OTK Company started with financial capital, but now has a form of business capital. Assets have multiplied thousands or tens of thousands of times, but as they have grown in size, their movements have slowed down. If it stays like this, OTK Company will suffer a huge loss. If you want to cut any losses, you have to bet on a crisis. What do you think will happen? That's... Taekyu put on a bewildered expression on his face. Bad news is already weighing on the market. In such a situation, even if I make a small move, the market will react greatly. Even if you move with the utmost care, the Rothschilds will notice right away, and the word will soon spread around the world. Come on, wait a minute. After all, according to foreknowledge, a financial crisis is something that happens. The foreknowledge I saw was precisely the beginning of the global financial crisis. I nodded. The financial crisis has already begun. I just don't know where it will end. What will happen happens. No investor will stand still knowing that he or she will lose, even when he has a chance to make a profit. If it becomes known that OTK Company invested in anticipation of a market crash, a huge shock will occur. Then will you be helping the Rothschilds? Answer. If I join, it will be easier to cause a financial crisis, and the scale of the crisis can be further increased. Let's think. If you decide to do it anyway, you'd better work with Rothschild, as that will maximize your return on investment. Perhaps Grace is waiting for me to reach out. In the meantime, I have used the crisis to gain financial gains, or tangible and intangible gains such as fame or fame. Brexit, Hosung Savings Bank bankruptcy, Ronald election, Big One, PS airbag defect, North Sea oil facility damage, Nishida securities order mistake, etc. But not all of this was created by me. Even if they took advantage of the crisis, at least they did not have any involvement in the occurrence of the crisis. But this case is completely different. The moment I move, a crisis arises. I am the culprit behind the financial crisis. In other words, it becomes a trigger. Whether that's true or not, the world will believe so. And the Rothschilds, as they have done for a long time, will seek their interests in the shadows. If you stay still, you can't avoid losses, and if you move, you help the Rothschilds. There's no way to stop it though. Whichever one you choose, you are playing according to the will of the Rothschilds. I remembered Grace's eyes looking at me. It was designed to be like this from the beginning. The crisis that started in finance was slowly but surely destroying the world. After a brief lull, the Chinese stock market began to plunge again. The Shanghai Composite Index collapsed at the 3,000 level, which was considered a psychological barrier. China has tried to prevent the crisis by introducing various stimulus packages. It provided emergency funds and regulated companies' dollar holdings and remittances in order to increase their foreign exchange reserves. Companies that were delaying currency exchange because they thought the dollar would continue to strengthen had no choice but to exchange dollars for yuan due to government pressure. The financial authorities even conducted a search and seizure on the securities company to investigate the short selling. Businessmen and financiers known to have participated in the short selling were summoned one after another and subjected to intense investigation. Nevertheless, the short selling balance continued to increase, and even state-owned enterprises went bankrupt or applied for rollovers because they were unable to repay their maturing bonds. Like the stock market crash, the real estate market was also a problem. In the meantime, the Chinese real estate market has been a floating business. After setting up a company, he could make money by borrowing money and building and selling houses and buildings. As a result, more than 100,000 developers were scrambled, and the financial world lent them huge amounts of money. However, problems such as economic downturn, aging population, oversupply, and interest rate hikes all erupted at once, and as many as 857 companies went bankrupt in January alone. In the midst of this, even Tong Construction, one of the top 5 construction companies in China, filed for bankruptcy and poured cold water on the market. Banks that made loans and guaranteed PF loans for various development projects carried out by Tong Construction were struck by lightning. The Chinese government has partially turned a blind eye to the insolvency of companies for employment. However, when the lid was opened, the insolvency was much more serious than expected. If it had been before, the government would have stepped in to block it, but now it is difficult to do anything because it is urgent to prevent bank insolvency. 800 billion yuan of bonds maturing in the real estate industry in the first half alone. It is said to be worth more than $100 billion and the market is in chaos. The Shanghai Composite Index plunged 8.23%. The biggest drop as news of the stimulus package fell short of market expectations and the bankruptcy of real estate companies. The U.S.-China trade dispute, which had been settled after the Zhou incident, resurfaced again. It was the United States that drew the sword first. As the dollar continued to strengthen due to the base rate hike, U.S. companies' export routes were blocked, and as a way to solve the problem, they aimed directly at China. China must stop subsidizing its businesses and remove non-tariff barriers. Until the measures are implemented, the U.S. will impose tariffs of up to 50% on more than 6,000 Chinese goods. In addition, it enumerates all the cases suspected of stealing technology and mentions restrictions on transactions with Chinese IT companies and designation as a currency manipulator. China also strongly opposed it as it is a situation that cannot back down. If the U.S. imposes tariffs on Chinese products, China will have no choice but to impose retaliatory tariffs. The media all reported on the possibility of a collapse of the Chinese economy. Chinese economy, the myth is over. Shanghai Composite Index fell more than 40% from its peak. Crisis from China. What to do? The U.S.-China trade dispute reignites. George Soros. There is a big bubble in China's stock market and real estate market. Hedge fund investors unanimously overvalue the yuan. This will really ruin China. Why are Korean stocks falling? Minus 2,500 is broken. Isn't it going down to 2,000 again? The Kospi falls below 1,000 as it did during the financial crisis. Until then, it's best not to think about buying it. After the earthquake, I trusted and invested, but it looks sloppy. No, Jinhu Kong didn't tell me to buy stocks, so why are you swearing? What is the government doing? Don't buy stocks with national pension. It's the start of the crash. What's the song already? While China's economy was deteriorating, another bad news broke out in Europe as if it were a competition. This is the bankruptcy of Deutsche Bank in Germany. Deutsche Bank is Germany's largest bank with a history of about 150 years. This is not the first time that Deutsche Bank's bankruptcy rumors have surfaced. It has been suffering from difficulties for a long time due to high cost structure, continuous deficit, lax management, reduced loan-to-deposit margin due to zero interest rate U.S. fines and failure to invest in derivatives. But this time the situation was really serious. There were two main reasons. First, Deutsche Bank holds a huge amount of Greek government bonds. Perhaps it was because it was determined that the EU could not default on its debts. However, Greece eventually went bankrupt and accepted the austerity measures on condition that its debts could be forgiven. So, let alone interest, it fell below 70% of the face value. However, this time Greece rejected the austerity measures and confronted it by leaving the EU, and Greek government bonds plummeted again. If Grexit becomes a reality, it could become a piece of paper altogether. Second, a sudden surge in the U.S. benchmark interest rate caused huge losses in the bond sector. Deutsche Bank CEO Daniel Berwitz has announced that it will urgently cut 20,000 jobs and sell assets worth 80 billion euros. German financial authorities called it a rumor and started to evolve. Nevertheless, depositors rushed to the bank to withdraw their money, and Deutsche Bank stock plunged 42% in one day. Even before the announcement, Deutsche Bank had concentrated on short selling, which was 10 times higher than usual. The bigger problem is that this is not just a Deutsche Bank problem. Since December of last year, almost all banks are known to have suffered massive losses in bonds and stocks. If a bank goes bankrupt, the repercussions are unimaginable. Failure to do so may lead to bankruptcy in the financial sector. To discuss countermeasures, financial authorities and bank heads of major European banks gathered in Belgium. The event was also attended by ECB President Louis Weidmann. A fierce debate ensued over several days. However, the ECB has already lowered interest rates to zero to stimulate the economy and is releasing money. Therefore, it was difficult to come up with additional measures. The worst January has passed. But by February, the situation showed no signs of improving. The Chinese stock market fell more than 50% from its peak, and the stock market plunged again with the Japanese stock market cap inverted. Considering that the Japanese stock market was not good before that, it was easy to see how much the Chinese stock market had plunged in 3 months. As the crisis in Europe and China grows, the United States has not been spared either. Read more at wuxiax.com. The three major indices, the Dow, Nasdaq and S&P, fell more than 20%, and it was undeniable that a bear market had begun. Wall Street hedge fund managers have secretly gathered in one place. There were only about 10 people, but the amount each one of them could move was tens of billions of dollars. The person sitting at the top is a white male in his late 40s. His name is Carl Albert Singer. He is the CEO of Albert Management. He looked around the faces of the gathered people with sharp eyes. Sorry for making you gather at a busy time. In fact, the global financial market today was a thin ice sheet. If you stumble a little, you will immediately fall into the water. Because of this, everyone could not sleep properly and were checking the market situation. Nevertheless, the reason I took this time off is because I got a lot of help from Carl Singer. No one knows in which direction the market will move in the future. But Carl Singer gave them accurate information on how the market might move in the future. Even those who did not believe him at first began to sell the assets, albeit belatedly. Without the information, hedge funds would have been swept away by the crisis and suffered huge losses. Albert Management liquidated all its assets before December, and other hedge funds have also sold large assets to secure enough ammunition. It is only a matter of time before China collapses. None of the people seated at that statement objected. A huge ship called China has already begun to sink. Only getting out as quickly as possible can reduce damage. It would be even better if you could bring something worthwhile to make money in the process. Everyone knew what a great opportunity this was. An opportunity like this will never come again in a lifetime. Okta Capital CEO Dan Moorhead asked, "How do you think it will move after Gong Jinhu?" No one can deny that Jinhu Kong is the most outstanding investor in the 21st century. He has earned the highest return on investment in human history since the creation of the financial market. That too in less than 10 years. As the situation was the situation, everyone paid attention to Kang Jinhu's every move. There was no movement to sell assets or invest somewhere. There was no way to know what he was thinking as he avoided media interviews and did not express his position. If Jinho Kang moves with them, the probability of success increases even more. However, we cannot rule out the possibility that the situation will be reversed if she takes the opposite position. Carl Singer said confidently with a smile. You don't have to worry. He won't be able to do anything. Hedge fund managers spent half a day discussing detailed strategies. They laughed and talked to each other, but in their minds each counted differently. Money has neither good nor evil, neither friend nor foe. They unite as one in front of profit, but turn their backs when the situation changes. What Carl Singer has to do is convince them that this is an opportunity to make money. It takes more than 100 words to persuade savvy investors in the marketplace. Everyone lies. But no one is lying when they bet money. Albert management was to invest in the first and most risky assets. In this case, you take the greatest risk, but at the same time you can make the most profit. Carl Singer told them. Albert management will take the lead. You just have to follow along. Carl Singer stood by the window and looked down. I could see cars and people busily moving between the skyscrapers of Manhattan. It felt like the world was beneath my feet. Everyone stood up to look up, but he was still looking up from below. It is not the person who manages the capital that has the power in the market, it is the person who has it. No matter how good an investment opportunity is, if you don't have money, it's of no use. Huge capital is a powerful force in itself. Money makes everything possible. Who is not in awe when he sees a mountain of gold? He was a lawyer at a law firm before founding Albert Management. He found out about them while he was pursuing a lawsuit involving a financial company. They gave him a huge amount of money to help him set up a hedge fund. They have the power to move the market. No, they were the mayor. Investing in accordance with the information they provided could make a huge profit. If this task is successful, you will have the power to move the world away from the shogi horse that moves according to the owner's will. He knew what Rothschild had to offer to Kang Jinhu. What some people cannot achieve even if they work hard all their lives, others can get it very easily. If only I could climb on top of it. Carl Singer clenched his fists tightly. Massive anti-China protests broke out in Hong Kong. It started in China. The Chinese financial authorities have identified financial institutions in Hong Kong as the main culprits in the short selling, and announced that they will summon a large number of Hong Kong businessmen and financiers to the mainland for investigation. In a word, it was the logic that Hong Kong's speculative forces were ruining the Chinese economy, and in fact, blamed the economic failure on Hong Kong. Hong Kongers reacted violently to this. Hong Kong was guaranteed autonomy for 50 years after it was returned to China and has exercised its own judicial powers. However, if China can summon Hong Kongers to the mainland as needed, there will be no law prohibiting the summoning of politicians and human rights activists whom the Communist Party considers a prick. The first protest was a whopping 1 million, and 1 in 7 Hong Kong citizens took part in the protest. As the scale of the protests grew over time, the Chinese and Hong Kong governments were surprised and withdrew their recall policy. However, the public sentiment, which once boiled, did not know how to subside. The Chinese Communist Party's repression and control over Hong Kong exploded with this incident. The protests in Hong Kong have now spread to the anti-China movement and the Hong Kong pro-democracy movement. When the One China principle showed signs of faltering, China could not back down either. Prime Minister Bo Xiaoyu said in a strong tone, "No one should shake the One China principle." China moved a large number of the People's Liberation Army to Shenzhen, which is adjacent to Hong Kong. This was nothing more than a warning that the People's Liberation Army could be deployed to suppress the protesters in an emergency. The whole world watched with concern over the possibility of a second Tiananmen Square incident in Hong Kong. Simanjium was neglected like an abomination due to the buildings that were being built. Stock prices fell endlessly, businesses went bankrupt and people lost their jobs. Houses and buildings were handed over to banks, and banks were handed over to speculative capital. A dispute broke out between Ireland and the United Kingdom over the construction of a border wall, and terrorism broke out in a Northern Ireland shopping mall and soccer field. Greece rejected the austerity measures and declared its exit from the EU, and other EU countries suffering from the economic crisis also joined in. In countries that lost welfare and security due to national bankruptcy, people continued to flee. As refugees crossed the border, anti-refugee protests and hate crimes spread in each region. Riots and looting have erupted around the world, with clashes reminiscent of civil wars. China eventually deployed the People's Liberation Army to forcibly suppress the protests in Hong Kong. People fell with gunshots and bleeding. Screams and weeping erupted from all sides. I was standing in the middle of it all. War isn't the only thing that kills life. A financial crisis can disrupt people's daily lives. While everyone is suffering, some have made a huge profit. Those with the capital bought stocks and real estate that had gone cheap, and took over state-owned enterprises and infrastructure. The poor got poorer and the rich got richer. Poor countries got poorer and rich countries got richer. Grace Rothschild looked at me and said, "Come with us. You can have everything in the world." At that moment I woke up from my dream. When I opened my eyes, I saw Ellie's expression. She looked at me with a surprised expression. "It's okay." "Yes. It's okay." His forehead was full of cold sweat and his back was cold. Eli wiped the sweat from my forehead with her hand. "What did you dream about that made you so surprised?" I remembered the sights I had seen in my dreams. Everything was vivid as if I had seen it with my own eyes. Is this just a dream or is it a future that will happen? It's the first time I've had such a dream since Big One. Despite all their efforts, the big one finally happened. So, is this something that can't be prevented just like natural disasters? I shook my head. It was just a nightmare. It's because I've been under so much stress these days. I lay down again but sleep did not come. Is it the same for Ellie? She asked me. Would you like a beer? I nodded. That would be great. We went down to the first floor and sat facing each other at the wine bar on the other side of the kitchen. I handed her her beer from her refrigerator. We hit the can. As the cold beer ran down her throat, she seemed to have a bit of a comeback. I thought it had been a long time since we drank together. These days we've been busy with each other, so we haven't had much time to talk face to face. How is your company these days? The atmosphere is ridiculous. Everyone goes to work and at the same time worrying about how much money they will lose. They are holding out day by day. Every day we get a lot of complaints from customers. Basically, the IB takes a long position. You may think that it is not enough to sell all your assets and bet short, but that is only possible with hedge funds that are free to manage. The derivatives investment ratio of a securities company cannot exceed a certain limit. There are no derivatives in the market to buy that much in the first place. When the market goes up, everyone can make money. But when the market goes down, someone must lose money to make money. No matter how good the management is, the only way to reduce losses is to reduce it. Thankfully, thanks to preparations in advance, Golden Gate had a small loss compared to other IBs. Now, domestic securities companies were being bombarded. China, India, ASEAN funds and Brazilian bonds, which have been selling hard so far, fell in half and fell into 3 and 4 halves. It really is the first time the market has fallen this much. Ellie joined Golden Gate after the financial crisis. Even if the market has been shaken for a while, it will be the first time you have experienced such a decline. I nodded. Countries like Korea will just be swept away by the global economy. Even though it is the 11th largest economy in the world, its share in the world economy is only 2%. Moreover, the proportion of imports and exports is much larger than that of domestic consumption. If the global economy is shaken, it is a structure that is bound to receive a shock as it is. As the economy is highly dependent on China, the crisis in China has also spread to Korea. The Kospi index collapsed not too long after 3000 collapsed, and even 2500 collapsed, and now 2000 is threatened. The buying trend disappeared, the market faltered despite the small bad news, and the exchange rate jumped to 1251. However, it can be said that this was also very good. The situation in other countries right now is nonsense. China has been investing heavily in emerging countries in Asia and Africa, where the US has relatively weak influence, pursuing a one-on-one strategy. ASEAN countries, which depended on China for investment and exports, showed signs of collapse one by one, which was another bad news for Korea. External factors are a problem, but internal factors are also a problem. The most serious is the household debt of 1,600 trillion won. Korea's household debt was the highest in the world as a percentage of GDP. This crazy increase is due to low interest rates and soaring real estate prices. Because interest rates are low, borrow money to buy a house, and when you and I buy a house prices keep rising, borrowing more money to buy a house that has risen in price. But when interest rates suddenly rose, the opposite happened. When interest rates nearly doubled in just a few months, homeowners, unable to bear the interest burden, tried to sell their houses to pay off their debts. However, as interest rates continued to rise, no one was willing to borrow money to buy a house, and house prices continued to fall. We are not yet at the stage to talk about bank insolvency, but if interest rates rise further here, there is a possibility that the real estate bubble will burst and fall into a long-term recession like Japan. Read more at wuxiax.com. Ellie said while drinking beer. I spoke to my mother today. Are your parents okay? Of course. But I'm a little worried. There were also deaths yesterday. Ellie had a look on her face that she didn't mind, but her eyes were full of anxiety. Instead of complying with the demands of the people, the Hong Kong government has resolutely suppressed the protests. Clashes between protesters and Hong Kong police continued, paralyzing the city system. Roads were controlled, subways stopped, and government offices closed. And the People's Liberation Army trained like it was in Shenzhen. Hong Kong is Ellie's hometown. I couldn't help but tell her that her People's Liberation Army could be deployed and trample her protesters. I remembered something from a long time ago. When she returned to school, she once played a game with a classmate. I know. Was she the Meister Pizza representative? Yes. The rules were simple. It was just a game where the one who accumulates more cash within the set time wins. Ellie grinned. I got it wrong. How dare you brag about your money against Jinho? In retrospect, it was childish. But she thought that maybe the current situation might be similar to that back then. In the market, the one with more money has an absolute advantage. To prevent a crisis, you need more money than your opponent. In the end, it is a game of who can accumulate more money. The Rothschilds have more capital to mobilize than I do. Moreover, other speculative capitals were already moving along. This was one huge stream. No matter how rich I am in the world, I can't fight the whole market. The only thing I could do was hold on to not drift away with the flow. A feeling of helplessness enveloped her body. What am I supposed to do? Is there any other way than to sit still and take losses and watch the world economy collapse? Or join hands with the Rothschilds and invest in a crisis? At that moment, something flashed in front of my eyes. What the hell is this? I was shocked to see Yeji. Why am I seeing this now? Could this be the solution to the current crisis? But is this really possible? After a while, when I woke up, Ellie was staring at me. What's wrong? That. As I hesitated, Ellie smiled. I know. Did you come up with something good? I said to take you, who was driving on the way to work. I saw Yeji at dawn yesterday. Taeyong turned his head in surprise. Huh? What did you say? I took my hands off the steering wheel, but thanks to the route, the car went well on its own. Taekyu, who heard Yeji's content, was even more shocked than I was. What? Is that real? Really? I saw it for sure. Taekyu, who was silent for a moment, raised a question. But is it realistically possible? No matter how smart you appear, isn't this impossible? That's not to say that you can be smart. I had the same thought. While Ellie went back to sleep, she walked alone in the garden, contemplating the wisdom she had just seen. As she waited until dawn, she suddenly realized that there was no need, and she immediately called an acquaintance to inquire. Then she talked with him until the sun came up. Because of this, she hadn't slept since she woke up in the morning. Theoretically, it is possible. The problem is that I've never done it before. I'll see if I can do it this time or not. Taekyu rubbed his eyes and asked. Is it possible? What kind of madman is that? The reaction was still unbelievable, but as soon as I said the name of the expert, he changed his attitude. Oh yeah. It was possible. That's why the words are more important than the content. If an expert points to a deer and says it is a horse, wouldn't the deer be a horse? If this succeeds, isn't it great? I nodded. Maybe the money I'm making now feels like a joke. If you succeed, you can change everything. As long as it's successful. While we were talking, I arrived at the company. We went up to the CEO's office and had a detailed discussion. I told you what I had seen in my dream, and Taekyu was surprised again. What? The People's Liberation Army trampled on Hong Kong. It's just a dream, though. Isn't your dream actually a foreshadowing? It is not. I remembered the dream I had before Big One woke up. Eventually the Big One woke up, but the man he saw in his dream was not dead. In other words, even if it is a predictive dream, it can be changed. The world is watching, and the People's Liberation Army is being sent to Hong Kong. It's not like Tiananmen Square too. I sighed and said, I just hope that doesn't happen. When the Tiananmen Square incident occurred, it was a period of internal contradictions immediately after China's reform and opening up. Awareness of human rights in China was low, communication was not developed, and China was still before G2 growth. Therefore, it was limited to an internal problem in China and did not spread to an international issue. But now the situation is completely different from then. The Hong Kong protests were already an international issue. Although they are unable to speak directly because of China's ignorance, everyone agrees with the basic principle of democracy, that freedom of assembly and demonstration is guaranteed and protesters must not be oppressed. In addition, the protests were being broadcast live around the world through internet sites, FaceNotes, and ATube. Only Chinese netizens can't see it. In the meantime, China has been justifying its dictatorship by putting economic achievements first. However, now that the results are crumbling, voices of dissatisfaction with the Communist Party and the one-man system of Zhang Pinghua are starting to emerge. Perhaps we cannot rule out the possibility that the Hong Kong protests will be suppressed hard in order to silence internal dissatisfaction and prevent division. Although the CCP has deployed the People's Liberation Army in Shenzhen, this is only a warning, and no one thought they would use them to suppress the protests. Even the Chinese and Hong Kongers. If they really did that, the whole world would turn their backs on China. But if China decides to go their own way, what can't it do? In a situation where the whole world is groaning in crisis, there will be limits to international sanctions. We have two options. One is to wait until this crisis is over, bear the loss, and then move on. The other is moving right now. Taekyu thought for a moment and then asked, wouldn't it be possible to prevent the crisis if we act now? If we knew what we were going to do, the Rothschilds would be in a hurry. Someone has to step in and delay the crisis. Aren't we the only ones who can do that? I will. I've been thinking about this issue all night. I don't have much time left. Argentina and Turkey have already declared defaults, and Brazil, Chile, Romania, Ukraine, India, Indonesia, and the Philippines are also shaken. In Russia, several TWR export plans were cancelled, and the development project in Siberia was on the verge of a rundown. The railroad connection project with North Korea has yet to start. As the stock market plunged, President Vysotsky threatened to close the stock exchange and take control of the foreign exchange market. It's really possible because it's Russia. A hard Brexit is not far away, and following Greece, Spain and Hungary have also declared their exit from the EU. If this goes on, the EU may be torn to pieces. The Rothschilds periodically escalated crises, and each time the crises broke out, they took their own interests. No matter how much damage it causes. As Grace said of the Great Depression and the Great Collapse following the Great Recession, this financial crisis is the one that has been created with the most attention. As always, humanity will one day overcome this crisis as well. However, the appearance of the world before the crisis and the appearance of the world after it will be completely different. In the meantime, the world economy has been following the US order with the dollar as the reserve currency. However, the US is now raising interest rates regardless of the circumstances of other countries, and emerging countries are groaning in the aftermath. As the United States goes solo, each country is trying to find a way to live on its own. This is where isolationism comes into play. The world has grown through free trade, international cooperation, and cooperation. Because of this, it was possible to avoid major conflicts and wars. However, when isolationism deepens, The world is divided and each individual pursues his or her own interests. This is the worst situation for Korea, which is highly dependent on foreign countries. If you succeed, you gain everything, but if you fail, you lose everything. If you don't like it, you can either sit back and wait for the crisis to end, or join hands with the Rothschilds. That's only for the Rothschilds to do good things. I remembered the words of Grace Rothschild I heard in the Buckinghamshire mansion. It is not the person who invents the innovative technology who makes the most money in the market. He is the one who took control of the capital and the system. When that time comes, we too may have to reach out to the Rothschilds. The harder we work, the more Rothschild's boat will come out. I asked Taekyu, "What do you think?" Taekyu said as if he had nothing to think about. "Isn't the answer fixed anyway? Are you going to let Ellie's hometown be trampled on? It's me but you? Can you really take the risk?" Taekyu clenched his fists and burned his will. "Of course you should. Isn't this a chance to bring down the world's darkness, the Rothschilds? Aren't conspiracies meant to be shattered?" I said coldly, "You know that if you fail, you lose all your fortune, right? I do not care. Shall we let the world go their way? I will punish the otakus from all over the world." He's so excited. "Anyway," I said, "I did it with my mouth, so even if things go wrong later, you won't blame me. By the way, isn't there anyone other than me who needs permission? Hyunju's older sister? My sister is also a shareholder of the OTK company, so do I need to ask for consent?" Taeyong placed his hand on my shoulder and shook his head. "No, your future wife. Aren't you supposed to propose to me and say that I could be a dog?" I decided to have dinner with Ellie. After waiting in the company lobby, Ellie came down after a while. "Sorry. Did you wait long?" "I've been waiting for a while." Ellie has overtime work today too, so she went out for a while, so she decided to simply eat dim sum near her office. She pre-ordered over the phone, so the food came right out as soon as I was seated. "Are you very busy today?" Right now Asia is going crazy. Originally, preparations for the wedding would have been in full swing by now, but bad news broke out saying that the day was far away, so I didn't even dare to start preparing yet. As she eats, she watches to get her timing to speak out. Ellie put down her chopsticks. "Let's talk now." "Yes. From the moment we met, you looked like you had something to say. Feel free to do it. Since we've been together for a long time, it seems that everything is evident just by looking at their expressions." I made up my mind and spoke up. "Can I do that stupid thing?" Feeling Sim awakened in my tone, Ellie put on a serious expression. "How stupid are you? If things go wrong, you could lose all your fortune." Ellie looked embarrassed. "My wealth is not even a penny or two. It's money you can't spend even if you're determined to spend it all." Being able to blow up all that money meant he was going to do some crazy shit in the future. It's crazy even if I think about it, but it's something I'm not even sure about. In order to persuade others, you need to show some determination. I quietly waited for her answer. After a while, Ellie opened her mouth. "Thank you for asking me first. That's because Jinho values my doctor's opinion. I will only ask you one thing, so please answer honestly." "Yes." "Do you think you'll regret it if you don't do that stupid thing?" "Well, do I really need to do this? Can't I just sit back and take care of my gains? Some people might laugh at them saying they have a hard time buying it." I remembered the people of Hong Kong being trampled on by the People's Liberation Army. What kind of expression would Ellie make if she saw it? She's not the only one. Thousands of people groaned in pain and despair over the problems caused by the financial crisis. Refugee marches crossing borders, protests and crimes, violence and murder, riots and looting, screams and weeping. Even now, when I close my eyes, all those things come to mind vividly. I remembered the wisdom I saw. There is no guarantee that you will be 100% successful. But we can't let the world turn to Rothschild's will. If there was no way to stop it, it should be possible to do what it can. No matter how much I thought about it, there was only one conclusion. I nodded. "Yes. If you don't, you'll regret it." Then Ellie spoke as if nothing had happened to her. "Then do it." I asked in amazement. "Really? Is it okay to be that empty-headed?" "Does not matter. You said it before. Jinhu said that I would feed him." If things go wrong, I will work hard overtime and also model as a side job. If there is a restructuring, I will even shoot a fish and chips commercial, so I do whatever I want to do. I was at a loss for words when I saw Ellie speaking confidently. And after a while I burst out laughing involuntarily. Ha ha ha. Ellie looked at me and asked, "Why are you laughing?" I just thought there was no need to worry. I have gained a lot since I started investing. The most precious of them are right in front of you right now. Compared to that, the money earned so far is nothing. So you don't have to be afraid to lose. It's money because you can earn it again anytime. I said sincerely, if I had to choose between my money and Ellie, I would choose Ellie without any hesitation. Ellie smiled broadly at my words. Really? So what if I had to choose between me and take you? That's... When I couldn't answer easily, Ellie put on a pouty look on her face. Shit. That's okay. After I had made up my mind, I organized what to do next and then contacted the people involved and gave them instructions. He asked with interest. Suddenly, "Why? Did you find any way?" "Yes." "Not sure yet." Again the opponent was surprised. "Really? What is that method?" "You are the only one who knows for now. I told you about the foresight I saw and how to make it happen." Hearing my words, he burst out laughing. Ha ha ha. This may sound crazy, but... Hey, this is a way I never really thought of. Sounds crazy, but I think it's possible. I've seen a thesis once before. No, in the current situation I think this is highly possible. That's fortunate. After I had made up my mind, I organized what to do next and then contacted the people involved and gave them instructions. He asked with interest. Suddenly, "Why? Did you find any way?" "Yes." "Not sure yet." Again the opponent was surprised. "Really? What is that method?" "You are the only one who knows for now. I told you about the foresight I saw and how to make it happen." Hearing my words, he burst out laughing. Ha ha ha. This may sound crazy, but... Hey, this is a way I never really thought of. Sounds crazy, but I think it's possible. I've seen a thesis once before. No, in the current situation I think this is highly possible. That's fortunate. In the past few years, new skyscrapers have been popping up all over China as if competing, and the city's skyline has changed. Today, as many as 50% of the world's skyscrapers are in China. I remembered the curse of the skyscraper, that an economic crisis would occur when the skyscraper was completed. Large-scale construction projects such as skyscrapers start when the economy is booming. Therefore, by the time the construction is finished, the recession begins according to the business cycle. Of course, it's all debt that builds those tall buildings. In a way, it can be said that it is a tower built on debt. I drank tea and brought up the topic. "How is the Chinese economy?" he said with a relaxed smile. "It looks like you came here out of curiosity. There are only a few bad things, but no big deal. As the saying goes that the economy is psychology, there is no other place where self-fulfilling prophecies come true as well as the market. When rumors spread that a bank will fail, even a healthy bank collapses with a bank run. Therefore, no matter how serious a sense of crisis internally, the government always says it's okay. The moment the government admits that it is a crisis, the economy will collapse faster. Since reform and opening up, China has actively attracted foreign capital and has grown. However, when the crisis was not serious, the capitalist showed signs of leaving China. Therefore, he was meeting foreign investors every day and persuading them. Meeting me is probably part of that. For such a thing, the rate of decline was unusual. Aren't almost all indices, including the Shanghai Composite Index, down more than 40%? Stocks sometimes go up and sometimes they go down. Now it is just a natural adjustment process. Even if you say this, you will know better that the situation is not serious. Then what do you think of the current situation in the Philippines? Is that a natural adjustment process? Wall Street's speculative capital was already moving towards Asia. Albert Management was at the forefront. George Soros, who had a history of attacking the foreign exchange markets in Hong Kong and China in the past, also joined. The Philippines was attacked first. The Philippines raised its base rate to 7.5% to prevent capital outflows after the US raised its base rate. This was a level that the Philippine economy, already in recession, could not afford. Credit default swap (CDS) premiums soared and companies had great difficulty in raising funds. In this situation, as a large amount of short selling poured into the foreign exchange market, the panicked Philippine government poured out its foreign exchange reserves to defend the exchange rate. I asked for help from neighboring countries, but it was difficult for everyone to help because it was difficult for them to decide on their own. Rather, Japan withdrew Japanese funds from the Philippines. How much longer can the Philippines survive? This huge amount of capital would not have come together just to rob the Philippines. Now, isn't it obvious where this speculative money will go? Li Sui, Director of Commerce, snorted. The rumor that China will do the same is the story spread by speculative capitalists. Should I believe it and fear it? The devaluation of the yuan is an unavoidable reality as China is engulfed in various adverse events. However, if it proceeds rapidly, there is a risk that not only the Chinese economy but also the global economy will collapse. China did not stand still. It inspires internal solidarity and puts great effort into securing foreign exchange reserves in case of emergency. However, the yuan is expected to depreciate, and the dollar has disappeared from the market. If it is certain that the more you exchange money later, the more profitable it is, then there is no reason to exchange money now. Companies also held the dollars they earned from exports without exchanging them. In order for the dollar to appear in the market, the yuan must be depreciated to a level that the market can understand. However, China has taken a similar approach to solving the problem. He called the CEOs and investigated them, accusing them of various crimes and starting to rob them. Even Ma Huateng, CEO of Wechant, China's largest internet company, was summoned and questioned. The startled companies all at once poured their dollars into the market. However, this method has its limitations. Companies are not stupid enough to try to hide their dollars more cleverly. Is that all you are curious about? Of course not. I then asked, are there any plans to send the People's Liberation Army into Hong Kong? At my question, Li Sui's expression hardened. The smile disappeared from his face and his eyes turned cold. There was a strong sense of intimidation in his small stature. He asked displeased, "Why is Professor Kong curious about that?" I said calmly, "It's the hometown of my fiancé." This meant that I did not want to send the People's Liberation Army into Hong Kong. Commerce Director Li Sui, who looked at me for a moment, sighed and said, "I understand you are concerned, but that is not something Kong should care about. To be honest, I don't want a lot of people, myself included, to have that happen." The protests in Hong Kong were getting more intense day by day, and the number of casualties increased. The People's Liberation Army deployed to Shenzhen began training as expected. State-run media such as the People's Daily and CCTV declared the protests illegal in Hong Kong and criticized the protesters as aggravating the economic crisis. The intention is to induce dissatisfaction with the economic downturn and the decline in stock markets and real estate to Hong Kong, not the Communist Party. I wonder if anyone will fall for this, but it seems to be working just fine for now. If you look at the Chinese internet and social media, rumors abound that Hong Kong's speculative forces are ruining the Chinese economy. As he said, in reality, opposition voices will be high even within the party. But I don't know what will happen if things change. I would like to meet you once more. Li Sui, Minister of Commerce, waved his hand. I would like to meet you. Li Sui, Minister of Commerce, waved his hand. You're busy. It would be better for you to die today. It is no exaggeration to say that China's economy is at a crossroads right now. Anything can turn into bad news. If rumors spread that I met President Zhang Pinghua for no apparent reason, the Chinese economy could be seen as dangerous. That's why you're reacting so sensitively. I didn't come here for no reason. Now is not the time for that. I'm doing this because it's not the right time for that. Seeing my expression, Li Sui stood up for a moment and came back. Can I trust that today's events won't go public? I nodded. Of course. I drove into Zongnanhai in a black car and was ushered into a small room in the middle C. After waiting there for about an hour, President Zhang Pinghua and Prime Minister Bo Xiaoyu entered together. Zhang Pinghua smiled and took my hand. You have worked hard to find a long way. Long time no see. Prime Minister Bo Xiaoyu said. I'm sorry, but I have an appointment after that, so I don't think it will be difficult to take more than 30 minutes. That is enough, I said, looking at them as they sat down. You know that speculative capital is targeting the renminbi. China is the most populous country in the world. The Communist Party is moving this huge country into a planned economy. As the top economists out of a population of 1.5 billion are gathered, you may have already noticed that a certain force is trying to destroy the Chinese economy. It's just a matter of whether you can succeed or not. I remembered my conversation with Professor Wei Hui. The problems of the Chinese economy were not temporary and accidental but structural. Corporate debt, real estate bubble, shadow finance. People called it the gray rhinoceros. If the black swan didn't stop because he didn't know, the gray rhino knew it and didn't stop it. We had to solve the problem before a bigger crisis came, but we put it off and let it go knowing it was a risk. Meanwhile, the gray rhino has grown so large that it has overthrew China. And now someone is whipping the rhinoceros. If the attack begins in earnest, how much longer do you think China can hold out? Read more at wuxiax.com. He looked at me with indifferent eyes. It was as if they were digging into my inner self. I looked at each other without averting my gaze. Money has neither good nor evil, neither friend nor foe. There is only profit and loss. Capital can move anywhere and work with anyone as long as it makes money. Now nobody can be trusted. After knowing the facts, there will be no law that tells me not to take the lead in destroying the Chinese economy. I think a month will be enough. In other words, is it difficult for more than a month? I did the calculations coolly. Can you make it on time? The moment I move, the other side also moves. You will only know who will win. If you succeed, you gain everything, but if you fail, you lose everything. It will be the same over there. If there was a way to solve the current crisis, what would it be? Everyone in the room was astonished by my words. Prime Minister Bo Xiaoyu asked with momentum to stand up from his seat. Is that really true? President Zhang Pinghua also did not make a sound, but his eyes seemed to be surprised. Before I tell you how, I want you to make one promise. President Zhang Pinghua opened his mouth. What? As I just told the former Minister of Commerce, I do not want the People's Liberation Army to be deployed in Hong Kong. I also wish that Hong Kong's autonomy and democracy will continue. Prime Minister Bo Xiaoyu, who had an expectant expression on his face, raised his voice as if to warn. Qiao Kong Jinhu. You better refrain from saying anything that crosses the line. A strong displeasure was evident from the expression on his face. I am not saying that I am going against the One China principle. Because Hong Kong is in the same position it is now, which will help China as well. In the past, the Soviet Union had the power to overthrow Finland, but it did not. The harm is far greater than the gain. After the Winter War and the Continuation War, Finland maintained trade with the Soviet Union even though it was a free camp, and served as a window for the Soviet Union to connect with the West. Hong Kong today is such an existence for China. Hong Kong is the financial center of Asia, and out of China's $2.5 trillion in exports last year, $300 billion came from Hong Kong. If Hong Kong's democracy and capitalism collapse in one way or another, capital will leave Hong Kong. If that happens, China will be hit hard as well. President Zhang Pinghua raised his hand as if not to say anything. Prime Minister Bo Xiaoyu, who was about to refute again, and Li Su-wei, the bewildered commerce minister, saw the gesture and bit his mouth. Can you tell me how? It is important from now on. Everything that will happen in China and Hong Kong in the future depends on this one person's mind. If you can't convince him, nothing happens. I slowly opened my mouth. The way I thought. After the crisis, starting with the rate hike in the US, everyone's attention was on China. The media poured out articles related to the Chinese economy. Chinese economy faced with structural problems. Is there a possibility of a global financial crisis from China? Chinese economy should prepare for future L-shaped recession, Japanese-style long-term recession. Huge debt weighs down on the Chinese economy. China's debt scale 270% of GDP. Severe bank insolvency in China. Bank failure is only a matter of time. If China collapses, global companies are concerned about serial bankruptcy. Bank insolvency is also serious. Experts all pointed to the debt problem. China's total debt now stands at 180 trillion yuan, nearly double what it was a decade ago. The bigger problem is that shadow finance does not give any sense of how much debt is not covered by statistics. This astronomical increase in debt is due to the deregulation and continuous supply of liquidity to boost the economic growth rate. Thanks to this, the stock market rose, various unnecessary development projects took place, and real estate soared. None of the countries in the world where debt rose so quickly that it escaped the financial crisis. China now resembles the United States right before the subprime crisis, or Japan just before the collapse of the real estate bubble. Anomalies were already appearing everywhere. The yuan continued to be under pressure to depreciate, stock prices and real estate plummeted, and bank insolvency surfaced. "It's just a matter of time before some banks go down," said John Lanchester, head of DH Management. Under such circumstances, exports last month fell by 17% compared to the same period last year, a shock to the market. Amid growing concerns, an emergency press conference was held in Beijing. Media from all over the world flocked to the conference room at the hotel. Numerous cameras and microphones were directed at one person. There stood the most famous investor in the world. In the meantime, many people have been curious about his thoughts, but he has not said anything. But suddenly, a press conference was held in China. Jin Hukong said in a calm voice, "Recently the world is facing huge challenges. However, the current crisis is exaggerated and has an overly terrifying aspect. The shock will continue for the time being, but the global economy will return to stability." As soon as the words were finished, the reporters all asked questions at once. "What is your rationale for thinking that way? Are there any concrete measures? What will OTK company take measures in the future? What do you think of the Chinese crisis theory?" Kang Jinhu said with a confident expression on his face. "Governments in China and other countries have sufficient countermeasures. If necessary, OTK company will also come forward. Speculators trying to make money from crisis and fear will never succeed." Gang Jinhu confidence in the recovery of the global economy. Kang Jinhu as a relief pitcher in the financial crisis. Global stock market decline slows down. A small drop in the dollar. Philippines foreign exchange market temporary stability. Prime Minister Bo Xiaoyu strong warning to yuan speculators. Kang Jinhu's remarks were immediately spread around the world. The market accepted this as a strong positive news, and the stock market, which had been falling, rebounded, and the exchange rate temporarily stabilized. Wow. Is it true that stock prices rebound after a strong earthquake? That's great. After Kang Jinhu. Kang Jinhu is doing what the president, prime minister, and central bank president didn't have to make all sorts of comments. Jinhu Kang said, "The world economy will recover." The world economy was restored. Isn't it just lip service? A little reassurance with this. If you say a crisis is really coming. Is now the time to buy stocks in real estate? Don't trust the speculators. With that said, you can actually buy a losing put option and short sell it. Then it crashes and you make a ton of money. A mansion in Buckinghamshire. The gaze of the old man in a wheelchair was fixed on the TV hanging on the wall. Next to him stood a young woman who looked like a doll. In the news, the image of an Asian young man continued to flow from before. There is no one in the world who does not know his name. If I had to pick one of the biggest changes in the world economy in the last 5 years, it was the appearance of Jin Hukong. It would not be an exaggeration to say that the flow of the world was changed because of his existence. He saved the US from the big one and ended the US-China trade war. He is driving innovation across industries including autonomous driving, batteries, electric vehicles, TWRs, pornography, gaming and more. His ability is also his ability, but it was possible because the development of finance and changes in the industry were intertwined. In the past, wealth was created by lords and kings with huge lands, and wealth came from factories and mines, but now wealth is created from the internet and financial markets. Now that flow has accelerated. Within a year of its founding, there were many companies that grew into unicorns and new wealthy people were born every year. Financial techniques have developed further and numerous derivative products have been created. And all products in the world can be traded anytime, anywhere as long as there is an internet connection. If someone can predict what will happen in the future, it is possible to make 100 times or 1,000 times the money you have in a short period of time. The young man who started investing from 0 pennies has now reached the pinnacle of global finance. His fortune has already surpassed that of Rockefeller and Carnegie, Howard Hughes and Bill Gates in their prime. Considering his age and the rate of growth of his wealth, he could not even imagine how much his fortune would increase in the future. When the crisis began, everyone turned their eyes and ears to his actions and words. Rothschild also checked where he was going, who he met, and every move he made. He said, "I wish he'd held hands with us." Grace smiled bitterly. He made a different choice in the end. Unfortunately, it wasn't unexpected. The booming U.S. economy, Brexit, the increase in refugees, each country's fiscal deficit and foreign exchange reserves, corporate debt and store debt, etc. Taking all variables into account, the timing was adjusted. And it happened just in time when everything was perfect. It is difficult to start, but once a crisis occurs, no one can stop it. What will happen is about to happen. The flow can be delayed for a while, but it cannot be reversed, even after a strong earthquake. No matter how many times I simulated it, the result was the same. In the news, we still analyze the background of Kang Jin-hoo's press conference and whether his remarks were correct or not. Grace looked at the face after the earthquake on the TV and muttered as if speaking to him. "What are you going to do?" Before I left for Korea, I contacted the Blue House. Even though it must have been hectic, I was able to make an appointment without any difficulties. As soon as I arrived at the airport, I got in the car and headed to the Blue House. President Ha Chong-min, who was waiting in the drawing room first, greeted me. "Welcome, CEO Kang Jin-hoo." "Nice to meet you, President." There was a hint of exhaustion in his expression and tone of voice. You may be wondering what I was talking about in China. Under the current circumstances, information from high-ranking officials in China would be nothing short of a rainstorm of drought. The shock that the global economy is faltering has also reached Korea. Given that it has sufficient foreign exchange reserves and is still maintaining a current account surplus, it is unlikely that Korea will experience a currency crisis. However, all economic indicators were deteriorating, including the rise in the exchange rate, decline in stock markets and real estate, decline in consumption and exports, and the bankruptcy of SMEs. Here, unlike other countries, there is also a downside that only Korea has. That's North Korea. North Korea resumed missile launches last week. This kind of provocation didn't happen in a day or two, but now was a very bad time. The ongoing Inter-Korean Economic Cooperation and North Korea project are expected to come to a halt, and the already weak stock market collapsed again. I enjoyed the press conference in China. Thanks to this, the financial market has stabilized a bit. If you think about it, it's strange. The global financial market immediately responds to my words. It is a temporary phenomenon. A bigger crisis could happen. President Ha Chong-min's expression darkened. How big of a crisis do you think there will be? Do you remember the global financial crisis? Of course. There will be no way to know at that time. He was a member of the National Assembly, and as a member of the Planning and Finance Committee, he poured out sharp criticisms against the government. The situation is worse now than it was then. This is just the beginning. If it leads to a full-fledged crisis, Korea will face the worst situation. What would happen to the Korean economy was obvious if China collapsed following the emerging countries. Then what would you like to do? To prevent a crisis, we need to take a preemptive response. But there is one thing we need to do. At my words, President Ha Chong-min opened his eyes and asked everything urgently. What is it? This is Chairman Im Jin-young. He had a bewildered look on his face. Isn't Chairman Im Jin-young in the detention center now? So, who doesn't know that? President Ha Chong-min looked at me with a firm expression. Read more at wuxiax.com. Are you asking to release Chairman Im Jin-young? I nodded. I am not asking for a reduced sentence or a pardon. I'm just asking for permission for the bail. I thought about getting a pardon after my brother was confirmed, but there is no time for that right. No. President Ha Chong-min said he was displeased. It is the power of the judiciary, not the president, to grant bail. I know. What I want is to become bail according to the established legal process. There are many people on trial in captivity. But why is it that only Chairman Im Jin-yong should grant bail? After all, isn't it because he's the chairman of a chaebol? I didn't deny that. What I need is not the individual Im Jin-yong, but the chairman of the Seosong group. In the meantime, the chaebols were released no matter what crime they committed because they were helpful to the national economy. What was the result? Rich people think they can commit crimes if they have money, and the people don't trust the law. Non-guilty, hereditary innocence, public courtesy, judicial murder, etc. Now even young children do not believe that everyone is equal before the law. How long do these things have to be repeated in Korea? He has been criticizing the privileges of the chaebols since his days as a human rights lawyer and even after becoming a member of the National Assembly. It's not just a matter of doing jewelry. Maybe for him, it's something he'll have to break his lifelong beliefs. I don't care what crimes Chairman Im Jin-yong committed or how many years in prison he was sentenced to. It is just necessary to prevent the current crisis. President Ha Chong-min didn't say anything. I got up, he said. The choice is yours. The first trial judgment of Chairman Im Jin-yong was held. Supporters and opponents gathered, and the audience was selected through a lottery. Seosung Group is already one of the largest companies in the world beyond Korea, and is having a huge impact on the global electronics and automobile industries. The media around the world paid attention to the outcome of the trial, and in front of the Seoul Central District Court where the trial was held, a large number of reporters from inside and outside the country gathered. Bribery, improper solicitation, business breach of trust, embezzlement, tax evasion, accounting fraud, etc. are not the only charges. The general consensus was that even Korea, which is tolerant of the chaebols, would have a hard time avoiding prison sentences. After the final hearings of the prosecutor and defense were over, the judge made a verdict. He did his best to avoid responsibility, but the evidence for the important charges was so strong that he could not escape guilt. The defendant is sentenced to 5 years in prison. A glimmer of hope of probation disappeared and a prison sentence was sentenced. Small cheers and sighs flowed from the audience. The lawyers all bowed their heads at once, but Chairman Im Jin-yong had a calm expression as if he had expected it. However, at the end of the sentence the judge added a word. However, bail is permitted until the final judgment in consideration of the defendant's right to defense, the fact that there is no fear of destroying evidence or escaping, and the impact on the national economy. The tightly closed door opened and a middle-aged man in a suit and glasses walked out. Unlike previous precedents, he did not use a wheelchair and did not hold a Bible in his hand. Dozens of domestic and foreign journalists were encamped in a semicircle in front of him. He looked around him naturally as if he had anticipated this situation and said, "The air outside is nice too." I told him, "You look healthy. I think I gained some weight." He smiled and nodded his head. I weighed myself and I had gained 3 kilos. I held out a black bag. He took it and opened it. Inside is pure white tofu. He ate tofu in front of reporters. The camera took pictures of it non-stop. Our image is being broadcast live all over the world through CNN, BBC, CCTV, NHK, etc. By now many foreigners will wonder why he eats tofu. I opened the car door. "Come on, senpai." "Thank you, Junior." We sat side by side in the back seat. Needless to say, you are well aware that you were released on bail because of me. And there must be good reasons for that. As the car started, Chairman Im Jin-yong looked at me and asked, "Then why did you take me out?" I told him, "I want you to make some batteries." Chairman Jin-yong Lim, released on bail despite the first trial conviction. After meeting with President Kang Jin-hoo and President Ha Chong-min, blitz bail permission. Possibility of Kang Jin-hoo's intervention in jewelry. The judiciary draws that there was no preference. Chairman Jin-yong Lim, Jin-hoo Kang went to meet him in front of the detention center. Hong's Orion and Susong Group chairman's bail permission is strongly criticized as a privilege of the chaebol. The appearance of Kang Jin-hoo and Im Jin-yong meeting in front of the detention center was published in the media around the world. There were mixed opinions on the internet about the conviction of Chairman Im Jin-yong and the sudden bail permission. What? Did Kang Jin-woo really bribe Hyo Changmin and release Im Jin-young? Ah, so it is. They're all the same. The chaebols are good. No matter what crime you commit, you will be released if you pay the money. -1 There was a conviction in the first trial. What do you mean by release? It's not a release, it's a gem. Paying bail does not eliminate guilt. If you are found guilty in the final trial anyway, you have to go back to prison. -1 There are often cases in which arrest is postponed until the final trial, even when convicted. What's wrong with granting bail for the national economy? In the first place, didn't the pro-North leftists forcefully arrest good businessmen? Release Im Jin-young, the best entrepreneur ever. Also, release Park Si-hyung, the most honest president ever. Did Jin Ho-kang really ask him to release him? Before that, I met Hyo Changmin and then he came to the detention center and showed me the tofu. Doesn't the answer come out? So why Kang Jin-woo? If you want to take it out, why did you take it out earlier? What is Jin Ho-kang thinking? The car carrying Chairman Im Jin-young arrived at the OTK company headquarters. In the conference room, team leaders and above had already gathered. Hyunju's sister and Eli also crossed over here, and Professor Ho-min Kim was also there. It was a long time since we met, so Chairman Im Jin-young greeted people warmly. I don't have time, so I'll start right away. OTK Research Institute succeeded in making a new battery. I hope that Seosong SB will use this battery to make battery packs and mass production lines. It is easy to think that it is the end when a technology is developed, but more important is whether it is mass-produced. How much process is needed, how much it costs, how much yield is coming out, etc. As the saying goes, a bead must be threaded through a horse to be a treasure. No matter how good a technology is, if it fails to mass-produce, that's the end of it. Chairman Im Jin-young showed great interest. What kind of battery is it? The contents of the JN battery are top secret. Except for the researchers involved in the development, only the people here know. After hearing Professor Ho-min Kim's explanation, Chairman Im Jin-young was more than surprised. Is that really true? I asked him. If JN batteries are commercialized, will they sell well? Are you talking? If this is true, it could change not only automobiles, but all industries including electronics, machinery, aviation, medical care, and robotics. If something like this has been developed earlier, why hasn't it been commercialized until now? The OTK battery, which only doubled the capacity of the existing battery, changed the game of the industry. However, if you could make a battery with a capacity 20 times larger than that, it would be nothing short of a revolution. Chairman Im Jin-young, who was speaking, shut his mouth as if realizing something, and he looked at us and asked, "Are there any problems?" I nodded. Like you said, there's one serious problem. This is because the main ingredient is geratinium. Geratinium. Yes. So, it can be said that this is a geratinium battery, not a lithium-ion battery. Seosung Electronics is the world's largest semiconductor company. Since rare earths are essential for semiconductors, there is no way that Chairman Im Jin-young does not know what geratinium is. You probably know the price too. To make a battery for a car, you need about 100 kilograms. He looked like he was at a loss for words. Do you know how much it is? Of course. At current prices, that would be around $230 a gram. The price of geratinium for one car alone is about 30 billion won. If you really make an electric car out of this, the Bugatti will be ridiculously expensive. Professor Ho-min Kim added a word. Geratinium used in JN batteries must be at least 99.99% pure. If there is even a small amount of impurities, a defect will occur. Chairman Im Jin-young said as if he was stunned. After all, if pure geratinium material cannot be obtained in large quantities, mass production is impossible, isn't it? That's right. Building a battery production line costs a lot of money. Unless it is produced once and finished, raw materials must be continuously supplied. However, if you look at the geratinium currently on the market, even if you buy all of it, it will be difficult to run the factory for even a week. Sanjiop Sr., who was quietly listening to the conversation with his arms crossed, asked, "So, where are you going to get geratinium?" Others had the same question on their faces. Only take you, Professor Ho-min Kim and Hyunju Nuna know this. I turned the light off by pressing the switch. The meeting room quickly fell into darkness and I pointed out the window. There. Everyone looked like they didn't know English. Ellie raised her hand and asked, "What is there? Do you see the bright light emitting?" Ellie nodded her head. "Are you talking about the moon?" "Yes," I said to those who still looked puzzled. "We will mine geratinium from the moon and bring it back to Earth." This was the prediction I saw. When I first saw the Sea of Abundance, I thought it was buried in the deep sea. But after doing a search I found out that it meant the name of the moon. There was silence for a while. Everyone opened their eyes and said nothing. It was as if he could see a question mark floating in his head. After a moment Ellie, who regained her consciousness, stuttered. "The moon." "Yes. So, not in a metaphorical sense, are you really going to mine on the moon?" "Right. Are you going to take a spaceship to the moon and return to Earth with geratinium?" "That's it." As expected, Ellie is quick to understand. Ellie smirked. "Does that make sense?" "What?" "Surprisingly it makes sense." Hyunju Nuna sighed deeply, and Sang Yeep Sr. muttered with a disappointed expression. Month. The moon round like a tray. Team leader Jong Ki-hong, team leader Seo Sang-won, and team leader Michael Lee also had similar facial expressions. Some people were making an open expression, "What kind of bullshit is this?" The sentiment is understandable. Because I was of the same mind. Team leader Seo Sang-won asked in a squeezing voice, "Can I ask you an excused question?" "Try it." "Are you crazy?" "Yes. I am fine." I asked team leader Jong Ki-hong, who still had his eyes wide open and his mouth wide open. "What do you think?" I was thinking about why I joined this company." "He seems to want to go home." Hyunju's older sister muttered as she pressed her hand to her forehead as if the headache was hers. "What else did you two do?" "From now on I'm going to come out to the moon," Taeyong said with a smirk. "Read more at wuxiax.com. Where is not Mars?" "Shut up." After another silence passed, Sanjiop Sr., who had come to his senses hippily, asked, "Then are you sure that there are geratiniums on the moon?" "Yes. The moon has many rare earth deposits and geratinium is one of them. Because of the nature of the moon, it is pure matter. No matter how much I say it, it's a little less convincing. In this case, should an expert come in?" Professor Haman Kim came forward on my behalf. After listening to the story, I looked up some related papers. As many of you know, there are various elements in the universe that do not exist on Earth. And the moon has massive deposits of rare elements that are rare on Earth. Everyone shut their mouths and listened to Professor Haman Kim. Rare earths are literally elements that are rare in soil. These are not substances that originally existed on Earth but things that came from space through meteorites and the like. In the case of the Earth, it is lost or deformed during the process of entering the atmosphere, followed by weathering such as rain and wind. However, since there are no such weather phenomena on the moon and there are many cryogenic regions, meteorites that fell on the surface of the moon are piled up with their original composition. If you dig it up and bring it back to Earth, it's a huge sum of money. For this reason, NASA also established a plan to mine resources on the moon, and the United States made a related law to allow anyone to extract resources from space. The United States is the only country that has sent a manned spacecraft to the moon, but other countries have also sent unmanned spacecraft several times. Sending a spacecraft to the moon with current technology is not difficult. As the moon mining business is highly likely to become a cash cow for the space industry, which is like a money eater, various companies showed interest. The most active is the private space company SpaceX. Alan Eberhart has promoted the moon mining project, and has promised to send a probe to map buried resources on the moon this year. I said. When I asked Alan Eberhart directly, he showed confidence that it is still possible if you put your mind to it. Nikola and SpaceX founder Alan Eberhart are the best experts in this field. He was still skeptical, but it would be hard not to believe him if he talked to this level. Chairman Im Jin-yong, who was making an expression as if he was compelled to understand, opened his mouth. Good. Let's say there is geratinium on the moon and you can mine it and get it. But what about the mining and transportation costs? No matter how cheap the rocket is, by recovering it and reusing it, sending a spaceship costs a lot Moreover, it is not known how much more the cost will increase if implemented. So, from the beginning, the plan was to mine expensive minerals such as rare earths and platinum to meet profitability. If it costs 2,000,000 to mine 1,000,000 gold, what's the use? It's hard to start with anything. If the JN battery is also used in the space field, won't the launch cost continue to decrease? Fuel accounts for most of the ship's weight. However, the JN battery has 20 times the capacity of the OTK battery despite the same volume and weight. If used well, the cost of flying a spaceship may be reduced to that of flying an airplane. Everyone's eyes lit up at my words. It may be confusing as the scale suddenly stretches out into space, but I have an intuition how amazing this is. If you succeed, you will have a hard time figuring out what the outcome will be, how much money you will make, and how it will affect the industry in the future. Chairman Im Jin-young burst out laughing. I've heard a lot about the Fourth Industrial Revolution, but I think today is right in the middle. I said with a smirk. As I said before, you know that there is no guarantee that the sentence will be reduced if this is successful, right? He shone through his glasses. It doesn't matter. We will do our best.